I read over 100 books and I got fluent in French. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I did it so that you too can learn to speak fluent French. I'll tell you what worked and what didn't so that you avoid making the same mistakes I did. I started learning French many years ago in university. I had 4 years of French classes in uni. 4 years of classes, a couple times a week, over 20 people in the same class, really old school teacher with really old school methods, lots of grammar exercises. You get the idea. And after 4 years of classes, my French was basically non-existent. I was decent at passing exams because I had so much practice doing multiple choice exercises and that kind of thing. But when it comes to conversation, when it comes to understanding native speakers, zero. Nothing. Rien de rien. I could barely understand anything and I couldn't speak at all. And of course, I ended up hating French because classes were really boring and not very useful. And I just did it because that's what I needed to do to pass the exams, right? So I saw French classes as a massive waste of time and also as a missed opportunity because I live really close to the French border. And after 4 years of classes, I couldn't speak French at all. But eventually, I started seeing more and more French, mostly because apart from the Basque and Spanish ones, we get French TV stations here as well. And at some point, I started randomly watching them. I also got some interesting looking magazines from somewhere, and I started reading them. And turns out it wasn't that hard to read if the content was actually interesting. And this was more or less around the time when I discovered the comprehensible input method. I was looking for ways to learn languages more efficiently online, and I found Stephen Krashen and his comprehensible input hypothesis. And of course, I got into it, and I realized French was much easier than I thought, and I started consuming massive amounts of French. I watched TV, I listened to the radio, I read magazines, and my comprehension gradually improved by doing this. And eventually I was able to read 4 books. I'm not talking about children's books or graded readers or anything like that. I'm talking about real books in French. The first one was pretty hard. I had to look up words all the time. But after that, it became quite easy. And I kept devouring book after book in French. And eventually I read over 100 books in French. Yeah, really. And now I'm able to read in French as fast and as easily as I can read English or Spanish. However, when it comes to speaking, I still struggled a lot. Every time I had to speak to native speakers of French, which was relatively often because I live very close to the border, I really struggled. I found it really, really hard. And finally, I came to the conclusion. You cannot learn to speak a language with comprehensible input alone. Watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading books, it's all good. But if you don't do a lot of speaking practice, you will never get very good at speaking. So how did I finally get fluent in French? Well, by doing a lot of speaking practice. I wrote a list of everything I wanted to be able to say in French, and I practiced those sentences over and over again. I read them aloud over and over again. I translated from English into French and then checked, and I kept doing it over and over again until I knew them by heart. I also did a lot of shadowing with native speaker content. And whenever I could, I also spoke to native speakers. But that doesn't happen all that often, even if I live next to the border. You don't get that many chances to speak to native speakers unless you're paying for it. And even if you have a lot of opportunities to speak to native speakers, you'll do much better if you have already learned a list of sentences you want to use in those conversations. So that's my advice. Yes, do a lot of reading and listening practice in the language, but do a lot of speaking practice as well on your own, shadowing and translation into the language with feedback. And this is how you can get fluent in any other language as well. By the way, if you want to learn French, I just started another channel in French, so go subscribe.